Hello, everyone. We're going to start off in a few seconds. I see that most people are streaming into the room, so we'll just wait. Sorry, I saw a message saying somebody cannot listen. Um, can somebody else confirm that you're able to hear? Okay, great. Thanks, Akansha. Yes, Tracy. Pankaj. Fabulous. Okay, so time to get started. Welcome to the Canadian Immigrant Web Conference Series, hosted in partnership with the ACCESS Employment and sponsored by Osgood Professional Development. My name is Ramya Ramanathan. I'm the editor of Canadian Immigrant magazine, and I'm joined today by my colleague Laura Jackman, who handles marketing for Canadian Immigrant. So thrilled to be welcoming you to this event. This conference is for internationally educated lawyers and legal professionals. Please note that for those of you yes, who are unable to hear, just adjust your audio settings. But also, for those of you who are having issues or you want to review it later, we will be posting the recording on our website and also on our YouTube channel. So thank you. Before we begin, thank you to our sponsors who support Canadian Immigrant and make it possible for us to run these free events and webinars for newcomers across the country. Before we get started, we would like to play a quick video from one of our sponsors. My colleague Laura will be sharing the video. Great. So I'm going to invite our first speaker. We're thrilled to have Megan Thomas from Osgood Professional Development. Megan, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then if we can get started. If you have any questions for Megan, please feel free to type them in the chat box or using the Q&A buttons, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. And yes, the recorded session will be available. So Megan, do you want to say a little about yourself? Yeah.
Sure. So, good morning from a beautiful day here in Toronto. I'm here on the York University campus at Osgoode Hall Law School. So it's a pleasure to be greeting you from here. I've been here at Osgoode PD for about 11 and a half years now. My role is to be the graduate program director for our professional Master of Laws program, as well as graduate diploma programs that we run, and a number of other programs that are designed for internationally trained lawyers, such as the intensive advanced legal English program that we run in partnership with our colleagues at the York University English Language Institute. I've had the great pleasure to work with my colleague Michael, who will be speaking with you later, and I'll let him introduce himself once we get to that stage, on programs that have supported literally thousands of internationally trained lawyers over the years from all around the world. And it's always really fun to talk to new people and get them some information to help them make decisions about what they might like to do with their international credentials here in Canada. So why don't I share my presentation and then we can get started. And what I always like to try to do with these presentations is to be relatively brief, so that I can leave enough time for questions. I know we have a large number of people who were registered to participate today, and I'm sure there will be lots of great questions.
We do, Megan, we do have a lot of people in the room today. I can tell you that already.
Fantastic. Great.
Okay.
So the way I like to do these presentations is to go over a number of different options by the outcomes that you might be hoping to achieve. And I know that a lot of the time, the people who join us on these kinds of sessions are newer to either the accreditation process for internationally trained lawyers. You might still be overseas and thinking about coming to Canada, or you might have arrived relatively recently. And so often you want to be sort of situated a little bit in terms of options. So I'm going to talk about the different outcomes that you might be thinking about or may want to think about if you haven't done so yet. I'll look at some education pathways by outcome and then some practical considerations you may want to keep in mind when deciding which pathway to take. And this will dovetail nicely into my colleague Michael's presentation, and Michael's going to focus on career development. And so we'll foreshadow a little bit of that as we go through the education discussion. So certainly, one approach when you're thinking about doing any kind of educational program or retraining in Canada is to simply look for a good program. But, you do want to ideally think about what outcome that's going to get you to, or how it would support a desired outcome, so that you know that you're going to be getting value from that pathway. So a few different things that you might consider in terms of using your international legal credentials. A lot of people are looking to become accredited to practice in Canada, although not everybody. So that's one major pathway you can think about. Some people want to work in a non-practicing capacity. So they want to work not as a lawyer, but in a field where their legal credentials or experience may be relevant. So that's another pathway. And some people maybe have those goals longer term, but at this point, they simply want to get working and sort of generating an income and working toward those goals. So, for many people, there is a shorter term and a longer term goal, or they're looking at these as different options, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. You can do one and then another, or you can be working on them in sequence. So we'll look at how they connect as we go through the presentation. So first of all, I want to talk about accreditation. As I said, we've worked with a lot of people going through the accreditation process at Osgood, certainly in the 4 figures at this point, so thousands of folks over the years. For those who aren't familiar with what the landscape looks like in Canada, anyone who has a law degree from outside Canada who wants to practice in any of the common law provinces or territories, so basically anywhere in Ontario other than Quebec, needs to go through the process that's been laid out by the National Committee on Accreditation, the NCA. The NCA is a body of the Federation of Law Societies of Canada. And what they do is they have a process where you apply to them, you provide your documentation and information about your legal credentials, and they will issue you a document, which is either a letter or an assessment, giving you guidance about what you would need to do to become accredited here in Canada. And what accreditation means is if you do what the NCA has directed you to do in their assessment, you then will receive what's called a certificate of qualification. And a certificate of qualification makes you regulatorily equivalent to someone who has done a Canadian LLB or JD degree. So you are then at the point when you can be licensed as a lawyer in Canada, and that would be the second step in the process. So the NCA process is federal, again, everywhere in Canada except Quebec. And then the second stage in the process is lawyer licensing. And for that part of it, you choose a province or a territory where you're going to practice, and you go through the lawyer licensing process in that jurisdiction. So this probably sounds a bit daunting, but it doesn't need to be. And what's good about the NCA's policies and procedures is they're quite consistent when we look at different categories of candidates. And so there are some commonly seen assessments for NCA candidates. The main ones that we usually see are, first of all, people from civil law or what are known as non-common law jurisdictions, which is most of the world, frankly. If you have your legal qualifications from a non-common law jurisdiction, so thinking about Latin America, thinking about Europe, Asia, much of Asia, excluding the countries that have a common law tradition, the Middle East, lots and lots of places in the world that are not common law. If you have that background, you do need to get access to an educational program to take at least some courses in common law. Because the NCA's view is if, again, you're coming from that civil law background, you need some exposure to common law in a program setting. The second common type of assessment we see are people who've done an in-person law degree in a common law jurisdiction. So Nigeria, India, England, Australia, again, quite a number of countries around the world where there are common law traditions for legal training. If you have a common law in-person degree, in most cases, you can get an assessment that allows you to either take courses at a law school or a program at a law school, or do what they call challenge exams with the National Committee on Accreditation. And usually common law candidates have to do somewhere between 5 and 8 of those exams or courses as part of their process. Another common assessment we see are people who have done distance education programs. So basically, if you've had less than 1 year of in-person study during your law degree, then the requirements are more onerous to go through the NCA process, because here in Canada, law school is required to have a certain amount of in-person study. And so if you don't have that amount of in-person study, the NCA process will require that you go back and do a period of study. And there's a bit of variability in what those assessments look like. So as I mentioned, some candidates have the option to do exams, some have to do courses, others have the option to do courses. And so if you are actively thinking about wanting to practice in Canada, it's a really good idea to get your assessment. On the NCA's website, they also have a really good self-assessment tool that will give you a sense for what your assessment might look like so that you can start thinking about the routes that you might take. The reason we usually advise people to get those assessments done is that without that, we don't have 100% certainty about what you need to do to be accredited. The assessments will give you a 5-year timeline, so you have quite a lot of time to complete your accreditation requirements. And so, again, if you're actively thinking about that, a good first step is to apply to the NCA. So program options, there are a number of different LLM programs available in Canada. Some of them are designed to primarily focus on NCA requirements. Others are not. They provide varying different kinds of benefits and supports and student services. And so when you're looking at LLM options from across Canada, you'll want to focus in on those things. At Osgoode PD, we have the professional LLM, which has a number of different specializations in it. And the one that's popular for many NCA candidates is the professional LLM in Canadian common law, which has both full-time and part-time options. You can study in person if you're doing full-time. If you do part-time, you can do in-person or distance. So that's just one example. We have a very large program, but there are other smaller ones available at other law schools around the country. The other option would be to look at taking courses as single courses. There are a few law schools, again, around the country where you can get access to either JD or LLB courses or LLM level courses to knock off some or all of your NCA requirements. So that's another option to take a look at. And again, that's something that we do here at Osgood, where we have a partnership with the JD and have some options for people to spend a year in the JD taking courses, as well as an option to simply apply as a special student to take a smaller number of courses. And again, other law schools around the country have those options to varying degrees. There are a number of exam supports available in the market. So those who are thinking about writing the NCA challenge exams, there are both some organizations that offer classes, and there are also people who offer tutoring. A lot of those folks do promotion on various social media sites like Facebook. And so that's something you can take a look at if you're going to write the challenge exams and don't want to simply self-study, if you're looking for some supports. And, you know, from our perspective, what you want to think about when you're looking at that is, again, what's being offered by the provider. What are you hoping to do in writing the NCA challenge exam? So, you know, remembering that from our perspective, you know, Michael and I work for a law school, so we're big believers in trying to actually learn the material and understand it that you're going to cover on your NCA challenge exams. You will need it again at some point. So some of that material is covered again in the licensing process, and you'll want to be able to demonstrate to future employers or clients that you understand that material. So you want to make sure that you're not just focused on barely passing those NCA challenge exams. Many candidates simply self-study and pass them and feel comfortable. So varies a lot depending on the candidate. Some people might need some language support, writing, or other kinds of support in the process or before the process. So I was mentioning at the outset that we have a program called Intensive Advanced Legal English. That's a program that can help people with language requirements for admission to an academic program, but it's also something that can help people who need to demonstrate language proficiency to write the challenge exams with the NCA, because they also have a proficiency level requirement. And so thinking about where you are, what you might need. Nowadays, it's pretty easy to find out where you are from a language perspective. There are tests like Duolingo that you can do online. And so you want to think about the full package in terms of what do I need to make myself successful in this process, and then what's the process going to look like. Okay, turning to the next pathway option. So this would be thinking about non-practicing careers. And here's where, you know, there are some interesting opportunities available. What we've found over the last number of years is that there are more opportunities for people who don't want to do traditional law practice. And so they might be working in corporations or in law firms in non-practicing roles. But also there is a lot of benefit in bringing legal credentials to other kinds of roles. So things like policy or business roles, it can often be really, really beneficial to have some legal experience. And so thinking about where you might go, you might think about continuing in an area that builds on previous experience. Or you might think, well, I'm in a new place, I'd like to try something new. And so, you know, for example, we've had students who have previous experience in-house or in the financial sector who found opportunities in those sectors here. Whereas other students will say, well, you know, I'm interested in pivoting to something different and maybe looking at a policy type role in government, for example. So there's lots of options here. And here's where Michael, to foreshadow where he's going, he'll talk a lot about kind of how you can do research and think about what your career options might be. So depending on what you're thinking about doing, you may or may not need or find beneficial to do some kind of educational program to help you with the transition into a non-practicing or law-adjacent career. There certainly are, starting from kind of the most involved and then moving our way down to the least involved options, there are LLM programs that are very specialized. So as an example, in the professional LLM here at Osgoode, we have tax, we have financial law, we have health law, we have business law, international business law, so many different options where you could, again, either build on knowledge that you already have, or if you've had some exposure, but not a ton, maybe you use one of these kinds of programs to enhance and also build your knowledge of Canadian law in one of these areas. Single courses can be a good option here as well. So, let's say you were coming from a financial sector background in terms of law practice, and you saw that there were opportunities in areas like anti-money laundering and global sanctions. You might look for a single course you could take on those topics, again, to build your knowledge and see how things are working differently in Canada. Certainly lots of colleges and other institutions out there that offer different kinds of programs. I know one of the things that we often see internationally trained lawyers do is they will take a law clerk or paralegal or immigration consultant type of a pathway. They'll often do a college program to move into those kinds of careers. And those are, again, areas where having the legal knowledge is quite beneficial and can give you a non-law practice option that you might do long-term or short-term. So those are all options you can think about. And then again, there are non-credit programs, so things like certificates that you can do. We run some really popular ones at Osgoode in areas like mining law, entertainment law, mental health law, human rights law. So again, those are options for getting shorter programs that are more focused and often quite practical in nature. So let's move last to talking about kind of some quick entry options. So again, we know that when you relocate to a new country, often there are reasons for needing to get working, getting a network, generating some income, getting some experience, giving yourself a bit of time to see what the landscape is of other opportunities, but having at least the security that you're generating some income. This doesn't have to be, the first job you have doesn't have to be the forever job, and often there are some really, really good options. So again, depending on where you're starting, if your language proficiency is in need of a boost, you might think about a language program, a writing program to get your level up to a level where you might be able to get a job that you're happy with, perhaps in an office environment, maybe even a law office, or simply work on those skills so that as you're in that first job, you're able to confidently do your applications for further jobs or think about moving into one of the other pathways that we've talked about. Single courses, certificates, and different kinds of continuing education programs can also be really helpful. So again, it's a matter of thinking about what are the smaller investments that you could maybe make at the beginning to help you either organically or through an educational program move into one of those other longer term pathways. So let's talk some really, really practical stuff to finish up before we move to questions. So certainly, again, the difference between doing an LLM program and doing something that's a certificate is a really, really big gulf, and there's lots of stuff in between. So cost and financing options are almost always going to be top of mind. So, different educational programs, different institutions have different price points, and they often vary quite widely. You'd want to look at, do they have awards? Do they have bursaries? Are programs available for provincial student aid or loans or grants? Looking at some of the great programs out there like Windmill Microlending and other organizations that will loan you money to do credential upgrading. So looking at what's on the eligibility list for those different kinds of programs where there might be funding available. Length of the program, obviously also important to think about. Certainly something like a certificate could be a few days in length, whereas at the level of an LLM program, you're looking at usually 1 to 2 years, depending on the speed at which you take it. And so how does that affect the longer term goal and making your work back plan for getting there? Time commitment. So this is a big one. We see lots of people who feel like, yes, I want to do an LLM and I want to do it full time because I want to get it done quickly. But often thinking about part-time is actually more practical because it might allow you to continue to work and give you, again, more time to work on the career development pieces so that at the end of that part-time program, you're able to have the job waiting or have really made some inroads toward that career development and career goal that you have at the end of your program. And so some of this is going to be professional considerations and some will be personal and what your life looks like in terms of how much time commitment you can put into whatever program you choose. What credential are you getting at the end? So for some people, this is really important. For others, not so much. One thing that might interest you is the relatively few, so that the small minority of NCA candidates actually need to earn a degree as part of their NCA process. For most people, it's just a matter of completing a certain number of subjects or completing a certain amount of time in study. And so it may or may not be important whether you get the LLM degree or another degree, or whether you get a certificate at the end. That may have some personal importance to you. One of the things you may want to be thinking about, depending on what career path interests you, is in whatever field I'm interested in, is a particular credential seen as valuable or important before you think about making that investment. And for me, always a really, really big one in terms of especially programs that are longer and more expensive is, what is all the different value that you're getting and the student services and the student support? And so I know for us personally at Osgoode, we've spent a lot of time over the years building up all of our extra services. And so we really like to think about this wraparound idea of, as soon as we've got students admitted to the program, we start really coming at them with all kinds of different supports in terms of career development, in terms of academic support, wellness support, and other things. And so those are factors you'll want to consider, and some of the research that you'll want to do when you're making program choices is, what am I getting as part of this program? How much of that are things that I think I would use, and how do I think that would help contribute to my success? So I am just about ready to take questions, but before I do, I'll just have a shout out here for our website, which has lots of information on it. We run Q&A sessions. We have some recorded information sessions as well on our website. And my fantastic colleagues in recruitment are always happy to answer questions. A lot of the questions we answer are just general questions about, I'm confused about the NCA process, or I've got my assessment, or I'm not really sure which program is better for me. And we're more than happy to have those kinds of conversations. So if you're not sure yet what kind of questions you want to ask, or we don't get to your question today, please feel free to get in touch with us through our website or by email.
Megan, thank you so much for that comprehensive presentation and for sharing your email address. As Megan says, you can write to her directly, but let's see how many questions we can get through. Michael, I see that you've been actively responding to questions on the Q&A and chat, but I'm going to ask those questions so others can be informed as well. So um, just a few quick questions. And Megan, if there is something else you want to cover, please go ahead. Questions have come up about fees. What is the exact costs? You've already spoken about cost as a factor, but is there a number that you can provide or?
Sure, I'll give sort of a few different dollar figures just for reference for people. So for example, if you're thinking about the National Committee on Accreditation process, there is a fee to apply to them of a few $100s. And then each of the exams, if you're sitting challenge exams with them, again, costs a few $100s. And so, for a lot of people who do the NCA process by writing exams, they're able to get through that process for, sometimes $2,000-$3,000 in total, if they're not using outside supports. So, that's not nothing, but it's not an enormous amount of money, especially if you were spreading it out over a longer period of time. At the other end of the process, I'll use Ontario as an example because most of our students stay in Ontario. The licensing process for a lawyer that you have to do after the NCA process costs a total of about $5,000 because there are various elements to that process. There's an application fee, there are exams, and there's an experiential training component. Now, to offset that, many people do what's called articling for their experiential training component of licensing, and those are usually paid positions. So there is a bit of an offset there. If you're looking at doing an LLM program, again, across the country, the fees at different schools vary fairly widely. At Osgoode, for an international student, so somebody who does not have permanent status in Canada, someone who would be coming on a study permit, our professional LLM program, whether you're choosing Canadian common law or one of the other specializations, would be around $50,000 Canadian for the program fee. If you are domestic, so you're a permanent resident or citizen or have some other kind of permanent status, you would be at around $23,000 for the full program. And again, that can be done full-time or part-time. So if you're doing it part-time, you can spread the cost out over a slightly longer period of time. For international students, we also have some entrance awards that can be applied for. So for some folks, that helps to offset a piece of the cost. And then thinking about the spectrum of programs I've mentioned, really anywhere from, we have competitors in the LLM space whose programs are much more expensive than ours. There are some that are less expensive, and then all of the shorter programs would be, could be in the hundreds of dollars or a few thousand.
Thank you, Megan. That was a very comprehensive answer and provides a general overview of costs. So thank you for that. A lot of questions are coming in, and I know Michael is going to be speaking about career pathways. So I'm not going to bring up those questions. We can ask Michael those questions at the end of his presentation. So there is also a question about can you recommend any suggestions on how someone may find articling positions? Michael, is that something you will bring up during your presentation?
Yes, I'll talk about, so there's a lot of interest in legal assistant, law clerk, non-legal jobs. So I'll talk about that and make sure I emphasize that. But I will be specifically talking about the formal recruitment processes for articling and the licensing process, specifically Ontario, but more generally across Canada.
Okay, great. And there is a question about the timeline of the NCA process. Megan, is that something
Sure.
you'd
Yeah.
like to
Yeah.
speak about?
So,
Yeah.
so absolutely, just to go back to what Michael was saying, Michael's going to cover a lot of the practicalities and timelines for different jobs. And so, making sure that when you hear that information, it's going to feed back and forward to some of the information we've talked about for educational options. So, in terms of the National Committee on Accreditation process, to think about it from start to finish. When you apply for your assessment, I believe right now they're saying 1 to 2 months to receive your assessment back once you've got all of the documentation in. Once you have your response from them, you can then take steps to complete that process. Now, it's important to know that if you're thinking about applying to an educational program to complete your NCA requirements, it depends on which program you're applying to, whether you'll need to have your assessment first. So as an example, with us at Osgood, if you're applying to a master's program, you don't have to have your assessment yet. We always recommend you get it before you actually start taking courses because you want to know you're taking the right ones. But if you were going to do something like single course enrollment, you do need your assessment because we need to make sure we're putting you into the correct course to meet your needs. So that's the assessment timeline. And again, if you're applying to a master's, you could sort of get ahead of that a little bit by applying before you've got your assessment. Once you have your assessment, really, when we think about the spectrum, if you are, let's say, coming from a common law jurisdiction, somewhere like, let's say, Nigeria, most candidates from Nigeria are given only the 5 mandatory Canadian subjects plus legal research and writing to complete their accreditation. And that can be done in a very short period of time if you were, for example, not working and really wanting to focus on getting that done. You could probably do that within, let's say, 6 months if you really wanted to. Maybe even shorter if you were really, really aggressive about it, but you'd want to sort of space out the exams that you're sitting. The exams are offered at different times during the year, so sometimes you have to wait a little bit for one of them. But again, best case scenario, let's say 4 to 6 months to complete that process. On the other end of the spectrum, if you have a fully distance learning law degree, you might need to do 2 years of study to complete your NCA process. So it can be very long. And again, your NCA assessment will typically give you 5 years to complete all the requirements. So you can take it at a more leisurely pace if you wish. Then once you're finished the NCA process, you would do licensing, and the timeline for that varies a little bit from province to province, and Michael's going to talk more about that. But again, to use Ontario as an example, the licensing process can take anywhere from 1 to 3 years, depending on the candidate.
Megan, thank you. A lot of specific questions have come in saying I'm from, you spoke about Nigeria, but there have been questions about India, Britain, etc. So can I just invite people to write to the email address on the screen?
Absolutely. There are very, very few countries we have not seen before in terms of candidates. We can certainly, as part of our advising appointments or our Q&A sessions, we're happy to look at people's NCA assessments or look at your resume or look at your transcript from law school. And all of those documents will give us pieces of the puzzle to help give you advice. Again, I will give a shout out to the NCA website, which has that self-assessment tool that you can use, but we're also pretty good at guessing what an NCA assessment would look like and talking through options. So yes, absolutely. We're happy to help with that, either in a one-on-one setting or on a Q&A.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. Megan, thank you for an excellent presentation and for answering all the questions in such a comprehensive way. So we will now move to our next speaker, Michael, who's been actively responding to questions. He's going to be speaking about a roadmap for job opportunities and career pathways. So, Michael, would you like to introduce yourself briefly and get started with your presentation?
Sure. So first of all, my name's Michael Tam. I do want to recognize that, we are on traditional territories of Indigenous people, and the area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. And part of why I really like to do land acknowledgements is because I'm also an immigrant to Canada. I am an immigrant to these lands, and I do think that as an immigrant to Canada, we sort of have an obligation to sort of understand the rules and the culture and the processes and procedures that are here. And so it's great that I'm presenting to all of you who are really looking for information about Canadian processes and procedures. So I think it's a good way to sort of introduce not only what we're trying to do, but myself. As I mentioned, I'm an immigrant to Canada myself. I was born in Hong Kong, and I immigrated quite early. I'm an internationally trained lawyer myself. I got my LLB from the UK and had to go through the NCA accreditation process in order to be called here in Ontario. And I've been with Osgood PD as their program lawyer since 2015. I work with Megan on a lot of administrative things throughout our programs. I do course and program development with our instructors and academic directors, and I'm also a career and academic advisor to our LLM students and NCA candidates. And so I'm very happy to be speaking about launching your legal career here in the Canadian legal market. So let me get my presentation started.
Michael, thank you for sharing your personal information. I really appreciate that. Sure, a lot of our audience can connect,
Great.
with what you're doing. Perfect. We have your presentation on screen. So,
Perfect.
okay.
So first, I wanted to make sure that we sort of are in the right mindset to have this conversation, especially the undertone of some of the questions about wanting to be a legal assistant, wanting to get sort of an entry-level position, wanting to sort of break it into the Canadian legal market, I do think comes from a mindset that you are all having, which is maybe that I'm not as competitive as a Canadian law student, Canadian JD student, or that I somehow need Canadian experience in order to be competitive. And I wanted to make sure that you realize that that statement alone, those statements are not true. You being not as competitive as a Canadian law student really is as a result of you just being less familiar with the processes. Canadian JD students have 3 years to sort of grow up in knowing what the processes and recruitment procedures are like. Whereas I think a lot of you, who are new to Canada are just trying to figure this out, and it's a complicated process, and there's a lot more processes involved as an internationally trained lawyer. And so it's great that you're attending events like this in order to update yourself and to figure out what the process is. But once you have it figured out, once you've attended sessions like this, once you've sort of realized what your own timelines are, you will realize that you can be just as competitive, if not more so, than a Canadian JD student. And this leads me to my second sort of false narrative, which is, that everyone thinks that they just need Canadian experience in order to be competitive. But one of the biggest things I like to say to NCA candidates and internationally trained lawyers is that being a lawyer is the same everywhere in the world. The laws are different, the case law is different, the processes and procedures are a little bit different, but handling clients, dealing with legal issues, doing research, drafting memos, appearing for, oral advocacy in tribunals or courts, those feel very similar across the world. And you need to know the skills you bring from other jurisdictions are still useful, are still relevant, and are still going to make you competitive. What you are missing, however, is maybe the understanding about the processes here, or how to advocate for yourself and to sell the skills in a way that is meaningful to a Canadian employer. And so what I do want you to get away from is thinking about these things as barriers to yourself and start realizing that what is true is that you do need to advocate yourself. As a lawyer, you need to have excellent written and oral advocacy. And so you're going to not only need to present yourself well in writing, in emails, in papers and memos, but also excellent oral advocacy. And not just in court, but anytime you're talking to any legal professional in Canada, anytime you're at a recruitment event, anytime you're at a networking event, or just having even a coffee chat, being able to advocate yourself, being able to sort of emphasize how strong and competitive you are as a candidate to a potential employer or to anyone in the legal profession is going to be key. What is true is there are going to be some cultural differences, right? There are nuances about how Canadians speak, their preference for small talk, their preference for wanting to talk about the weather and coffee and curling. That is going to be different from the jurisdictions you come from. And so there are some cultural nuances that you'll have to learn to figure out how to engage with the rest of the Canadian legal population. But that's not to say that how you're interacting is wrong. It's just different, and you just need to know how to switch whenever you're sort of advocating for yourself in a legal setting towards potential employment. The thing about the Canadian legal market is that everyone will want to help you. Every single person knows how hard it is to get called to the bar, to be a practicing lawyer. And so everyone feels an obligation to help the next generation, to help other people who are going through the process. I know Megan and myself are drawn to these roles specifically because we want to be helping other people. And so you'll find that there's lots of people who will want to help. The distinguishing factor is that not everybody knows how they can help you. And so it's really important as a part of you advocating for yourself to know how the person you're speaking to might be able to help you, which means getting away from this mindset of just introducing yourself the same way to every single person, right? Hi, I'm an internationally trained lawyer from X country. I have this experience. I'm looking for this. Can you help me? And being a little bit more nuanced in, are you talking to a career advisor like me who can maybe help you, give you career advice? Or are you talking to a legal recruiter who can maybe talk about opportunities within their office or that they are aware of? Are you talking to a partner who hasn't hired anyone in the last 20 years? And so maybe it's more important to talk about their practice and their specialization. Important to know how each person in every step of the process can help you because they'll want to. But if your approach is the same to everybody, not everyone is equipped to help you with the information that you're specifically looking for. All of this to say that you cannot be passive in your own career. And again, it's great that you're signing up for events like this and getting familiar with all of the recruitment processes and procedures that are in place. But if you don't remember anything else from my presentation, remember that you can't just passively wait for opportunities to come up, passively wait for jobs to be posted online, passively hope and apply to things without making a connection in hopes that it results, because the most important thing is that you are showing up, you are engaging with people, you are making connections so that if you do eventually apply for a job, that you're the first person that comes to mind because you've already met with those people, you've already made those connections, and you stand out amongst everybody else who is passively applying to those positions. And the thing that I will cover sort of later on in my presentation is the differences in terms of application materials and networking and interpersonal interactions that you'll have in Canada versus the jurisdictions you come from. Some of you might come from jurisdictions where you have to be deferential to somebody who is seen as a superior, or some of you might be used to writing really vague application materials because it's in the interview where you're supposed to shine. And understanding how culturally Canadian legal employers are expecting your applications to be slightly different, and they're assessing your networking and interpersonal reactions in a way that is almost like an interview rather than just meeting somebody for a friendly chat. Knowing those things and being prepared for it is going to help you better advocate for yourself going forward. So make sure that you are confident in yourself, because again, even answering some of those chat questions, I noticed sort of this undertone of, I want an entry-level position. I want to start at the beginning. I want to make sure that I get some experience. And some of that speaks to a lack of confidence. And so make sure you first always are taking care of yourself and are able to come with your best foot forward, best face forward, so that you are able to project confidence and ability. You have to be able to convince whoever you're talking to about all of those skills in order to convince me to hire you. And one of the best pieces of advice I have for internationally trained lawyers is that the education and the experiences you have do not speak for itself. So a lot of you like to, just list your education on your resume, like to just say, oh, I have experience in corporate law. But that in itself doesn't tell me the caliber of work you're capable of doing. And as a Canadian employer, I might not be familiar with the educational institutions from your home country. And so as a part of advocating yourself, I need you to even shift in how you present these materials on your application, right? Don't just list the name of the school. Maybe tell me how it's ranked, that it's the top ranked law school in your home country, that you worked at one of the best top corporate law firms from your home country, that you've worked on multi-million-dollar files with similar types of clients that, this future employer might be working with. And so nothing speaks for itself. I know a lot of, especially, NCA candidates and ITLs might come from jurisdictions where they're not supposed to be overly boastful or come across as egotistical. But I'm here to tell you that until you tell me how amazing your work and education and experiences are, Canadian employers are not going to know. And so you have to start learning how to showcase your abilities and everything on your resume and everything you bring to the table in a way that really does highlight what you can do and how amazing that experience was. Which leads me to my next point. No one's going to do this for you, right? So you have to advocate for yourself, hoping that the reader interprets your application materials in some way, hoping that by saying, you have 5 years of corporate law, that you have the expertise I'm looking for is not going to be clear. You have to make arguments for yourself explicitly clear, because no one else is standing in those rooms or nobody else is sitting beside the recruiters explaining to them how impressive you are. And so you have to be the one to do that for yourself. And you have to remember that as an NCA candidate, as an internationally trained lawyer, you are unique. You have experience that Canadian JD students don't have. You have perspective that, younger people don't have. And you have lived in, different countries, experienced different conflicts and trials and tribulations in your life that, again, a fresh law school graduate just might not have. And so you have to understand that uniqueness of that perspective and how that might help contribute to being a more well-rounded Canadian legal professional. And so I'm going to focus a little bit on this slide a little bit more than I had intended because of all of the questions that had come through. But one of the things that I hope all of you got from Megan's presentation was an understanding of where you are in your process, because whether you haven't started your NCA process, whether you're civil trained and therefore not going to get an assessment, or whether you're going to finish all of your challenge exams in this year and then be done in a year, or you have 2 years of an in-person requirement, that's going to help dictate your timeline for what kind of jobs you should be looking for, as well as what kind of recruitment processes you should start participating in. And so for all intents and purposes, before you have finished all of the National Committee on Accreditation requirements and gotten your certificate of qualification, you're equivalent to every other Canadian law student. So as an internationally trained lawyer, if you haven't gotten and satisfied all of the NCA requirements, you are considered, in terms of rights of appearance and the work that you're able and eligible to do in law, equivalent to law student roles. Law students have limited rights of appearance in a court, and they have limited abilities to represent clients, and they're not allowed to give legal advice unless it's specifically supervised. And even though you're a foreign trained lawyer, because you're not a part of the licensing process yet, you are equivalent to somebody who is still training in Canadian law. As such, you are eligible for roles like summer student roles in law firms and first year summer student roles in law firms. And those are very common roles that exist within law firms because law firms in Canada have existed, for as long as the licensing processes have, and they know to be recruiting law students in Canadian law schools. And so as an NCA student, recognize that you are eligible to apply for those because you are still in the NCA process, which means you are not yet ready to be licensed. And so those summer student applications that are coming up, the Toronto summer student applications for second year summer roles are coming up next week, July 22nd. And so hopefully some of you are applying for those. And these summer student roles are for the jobs that happen next summer, so summer of 2025. If you're interested in articling next year, so next summer of 2025, then you should consider not applying for the second year summer student roles because you're not going to be licensing 2 years down the line. You're hoping to be licensing 1 year down the line. And there's also law practice placements, law practice program placements, which are also part of licensing. So articling and the law practice placements are a part of licensing, both of which you start after you finish the NCA process and therefore are in the licensing process. Articling is a 10-month experiential component where you're with a law firm, and the law practice program placements are 4 months of a simulated work environment with the law practice program and a 4-month actual in-person placement at a workspace. And both articling and law practice placements are meant to train you as a lawyer before you're called to the bar. So you can see if you're still in the NCA process, you should be applying to summer student roles. If you're in the licensing process, you're looking towards articling and law practice placements. And lots of questions that had come through the chat were not specifically about either of those, although I do think that many of you are considering doing those things. Again, if you're intending to become a lawyer, part of understanding structured recruitment is knowing that some firms will hire summer students that will then make up their class of articling students, which will then make up their class of associates. And so these structured recruitments at specific types of firms and organizations might be the way you get in, and understanding that some of these processes take a year or 2 years of preparation and application, this might actually be the pathway that you go to. However, lots of other firms will be recruiting off of those structured formal recruitment cycles. And so you might still be able to find articling roles all throughout the year on an ad hoc basis, depending on the type of firm and what their recruitment procedures will be. A lot of people in the chat asked about, potentially being a paralegal or a law clerk or a legal assistant as a pathway to being a lawyer. And I understand where this question comes from because in a lot of foreign jurisdictions, that is the pathway. You take sort of what's called an entry-level legal assistant or law clerk role as a part of getting the experience you need in order to then qualify to become a lawyer in the future. What you need to understand is that in Canada, these are not necessarily entry-level positions. In Canada, being a paralegal, being a law clerk, being a legal assistant, these are actual careers in themselves. People have designations that they need to earn in order to become one of these criteria of jobs and one of these categories of jobs. And people stay in these roles, for their entire careers because they are careers and they do different things. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't get some experience and that being a legal assistant might not which might give you that opportunity. But one of the things that you have to be mindful of, and that I do sort of as a career advisor with LLM students, is to let LLM students understand from the employer's perspective, they are hiring a legal assistant or a law clerk because there's a role they need to fill, and it is a full-time role. That role supports maybe multiple lawyers, and it takes a lot of time and effort to train a law assistant or a law clerk in the ways I want or the lawyers want them to do things. And so if you are an NCA candidate and it's clear that you're hoping to get licensed, and what you're trying to get out of the job is just experience, the employer is left wondering, what is my return on investment for somebody who's not going to stick around longer than 6 months or a year, and then I'm going to have to rehire for this role again. And so if your intention is to become a lawyer, if your intention is to satisfy the NCA and then go through the licensing process, my suggestion is only apply for these legal assistant or law clerk type roles if they're time limited. If you know that for the duration of that work, you are committed to doing that work, and that they're not going to have to recruit or rehire for your position again in the near future, then 100% take the opportunity and make sure you make the most of it. But if your intention is to apply for these full-time roles in the hopes that it turns into something else, recognize that that's not necessarily always going to happen in Canada. And the few times it does happen, it is sort of on a sort of one-on-one basis, depending on what the firm's needs are. And so this isn't the traditional pathway of somebody who's looking to become a lawyer in Canada. Paralegals are legal professionals in themselves. The designation is also a license that is regulated by the Law Society. And so becoming a paralegal in Ontario, for example, requires you to do schooling in order to get that designation, to get a license that's registered with the Law Society. And you do then become legal practitioner with different rights of appearance than a lawyer. And again, that's not necessarily the transition that you get from becoming a paralegal to a lawyer. The caveat to that being that the NCA has made sort of a pathway for civil trained students who also are a designated paralegal to recognize that as some common law training in order to proceed with the assessment with the NCA. But again, the paralegal is, a diploma that you're supposed to get and a license in its own and a lifetime career for many people. Similarly, with being a law clerk, there's lots of diplomas that give you a law clerk designation. There is a body that law clerks are a part of. And again, people are in these roles as careers. So I do want all of you to stop thinking of these roles as stepping stones towards becoming an articling student or a lawyer, and realize that these are jobs and careers that exist on their own. And while they might be great opportunities for you to get experience, they're not necessarily the direct pathway to becoming an articling student or a lawyer that you're looking to become. In my last slide, I talked about being active and not being passive in your job hunt and job recruit. And so don't just look online. Don't just wait for things to pop up. The most important thing that you can do that is very consistent across all of Canada is that you need to network. Anything that's posted online, anything that's posted on a student career portal, hundreds of applicants are going to be applying because hundreds of other people are also just monitoring the websites and hoping to apply for everything that comes up. Networking and developing relationships with employers, with recruiters, with articling students at different firms is going to help you understand how to make your application better, understand what those law firms are about, understand why they might be looking for people and what kind of work that they do. And they're also going to help you stand out in the pile of applications, because if you've talked to 5 or 6 people at that firm already, they'll know to be looking out for your application, and you'll be on the top of the list to be selected for interviews. Whereas if you're just passively applying, switching out one sentence in your cover letter for a different employer each application you're submitting, it feels a little bit disconnected as to why you're interested in the job. It feels like you're sending in a template application application. And unfortunately, in the Canadian legal workspace, that doesn't resonate with employers, and it's not going to get you as many interviews as a tailored one where you have developed those personal connections and networking. And so one last thing about the recruitment processes for summer roles and OCIs and articling and law practice placements. You are able to apply for any job as long as you're eligible to start that job when that job starts. And what that means is, for example, those of you who are interested in articling next summer, so summer of 2025, the recruitment processes as defined by the law societies start this summer. And so applications for articling for summer of 2025 started this summer, and some of those deadlines started as early as June of 2024. And that means as long as you are finished your NCAs by the time that articling position starts, you can apply for those jobs now, even though you don't have your CQ yet, as long as you are relatively sure that by the time that job starts next summer, you will be done your NCAs. And so again, going back to my point about paying attention to Megan's presentation, what is your timeline? Are you 1 year away from licensing, or are you 2 years away from licensing? If you're 2 years away from licensing, then maybe you consider some of these summer positions that are due next week. If you're 1 year away from licensing, maybe you look at articling that starts next summer or registering for the law practice program for next summer as well. So I'm going to talk about Canadian application materials. First, do your research has sort of been consistent across all of my slides, but you need to understand the firms. You need to understand what they do. You need to have made connections with the people that you've already talked with at those firms and find ways to incorporate all of that information gathering into your application materials. So it doesn't just read like somebody who just looked at their website, but reads like somebody who knows what the employer is looking for, knows what they do, and how you as an applicant is aligned with all of the things that they're looking for. In terms of preparation for application materials, I like to tell people, I read thousands of materials every year. And even when I have to go to update my materials, it takes me about an hour to really fine tune my resume or cover letter. And so recognize that as an internationally trained lawyer who might not be familiar with the format, with how to advocate for yourself, how to structure bullet points, that it might take you more than an hour to do each application and to make sure it's tailored in the right way. And so that leads to my next point, which is there's no one size fits all. There's not going to be one cover letter, one resume that you can send to every single employer that's going to be equally impressive. The more tailored it is, the more you've amended the materials for that specific employer, the better your application material for that job is going to be. The worst feeling in the world is knowing you could have done more on an application and having had it sent out without you having put in that work, because then if you get refused, you always think, what if I had just done this? What if I had just included this? And so make sure you spend the time to tailor every application you have in the amount of time that you have to do them so that they do represent the best advocacy for yourself for that job. So I'm going to go through what the application documents are. They're your resume, so your CV. It's a 2-page resume. It's a 1-page cover letter. And sometimes people will ask for references or at least reference contacts. And so make sure you have that. Some people will also ask for writing samples. And so you want to be mindful to have a writing sample available. And you'll want to make sure you have all of your transcripts ready, and then all of that can go into one package that can be either uploaded on the recruiter portal or sent directly to the law firm, depending on what their recruitment practices are. One of the things that I always advise students is also save the job posting. It's so important to save the job posting because sometimes the postings go down early, but it's also a way for you to remember what you applied to. I just had a counseling session with a student who said they got a call for an interview and they forgot what they applied for. And had they saved the job description from the web page, they would have known exactly what they were being called about and would have been better prepared to answer that call. And then I'm going to talk about format, form, font, and length of some of these documents. So first, it's a 2-page resume. You can see that there's no objective section, there's no skill section. One of the things about a Canadian resume is that you want to make sure you're proving the skills that you're saying you have with examples of your work. In terms of formatting, you just want to make sure that everything's very readable, that it's clear. Part of why this slide is so small is because this isn't the most perfect formatting, and there are ways to format that are completely different from this. And all of this to say, as long as it's readable, as long as it's clear what your education has been, where you are in your accreditation process, what kind of job titles you've had, what kind of places you've worked in, and the timelines for all of that, then as long as that's all clear, you can use whatever formatting you want. But the more simple the formatting, the less busy the formatting is, the easier it will be for the reader to get that information out of it. Avoid lists. So I see lots of applications that say, I've drafted this, 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 this. I've worked in this area of law. I've dealt with this legislation. And as people who have read thousands of documents, you know, the more lists you see, the less you pay attention to them. And so instead, find ways to emphasize the most impressive things you've worked on, the most impressive areas of law that are relevant to the employer, the most relevant skills that you're hoping to bring up. And don't clutter them into lists, but really highlight them in individual bullet points. Specificity of language is important, so avoid using vague language. There's lots of people who say things like, I assisted on, I coordinated, I represented on, and all of this doesn't highlight the skills that I might be looking for. You want to match the skills that you're highlighting to the job you're applying to. So if you know as an articling student, they're going to be asking you to do research memos, drafting documents, attending court, advocating before tribunals, then you want to make sure those are the types of words that come up at the beginning of your bullet points to highlight the skills that are relevant to the job. The less you mirror the language of the skills they're looking for, the less likely that they're going to understand how your past experience relates to this job. And more employers are moving towards digital AI sorts of filtering applications. And the more the language mirrors the job description and what they're looking for, the more likely you are then to be seen by human eyes at all. And remember, just like I talked about tailoring applications, even the resume can be tailored. The skills you have in litigation can translate to transactional work and vice versa, but it's your job to make sure that those skills are tailored and translated in a way that makes sense to the potential future employer. And so to avoid vague skill words, I've put up some here. So instead of just saying, I have excellent communication skills, realize that you can talk about summarizing skills, negotiating skills, writing skills. Instead of just saying you're a good problem solver, maybe you talk about being risk management, decisive thinking, your creativity, your cost benefit analysis. And so, once this video is posted, feel free to pause here and sort of take a look to see how there are lots of different ways you can even talk about being a leader, for example. Don't just say you were a leader in a job, because as an articling student, you might not necessarily be taking the lead on anything, but as a leader, you might have communication skills and interpersonal skills and critical thinking and problem solving skills that are then relevant to the job that you're applying to next. So all this to say is don't minimize the international experience you have, but find ways to make it make sense for the role that you are now applying to. And that might mean finding different ways to emphasize the different skills you've had across the experiences you've had. Before I move on to application cover letter, part of the resume also in each bullet point needs to showcase the most interesting experiences you've had, the most interesting work that you've ever done, the most high value, high net worth, most complex things that you've ever done. Part of why it's important to do that is because in a stack of 500 applications, I'm going to remember the people who've shown me that they've done really interesting things, even if it's not Canadian experience. And so find ways to catch my attention with the complexity and responsibility you've been given in your home jurisdiction. And so going back to my initial slide, your international experience does make it memorable and can be competitive, but it's your job to tell me that you've worked on those multi-million-dollar files, that you've represented, the major oil conglomerates in your country, that you've represented publicly traded institutions, that are listed on, the Nigerian Stock Exchange or something. So being able to give me that complexity and responsibility and the impressiveness of the work that you've done as a proof of a skill that's related to this job, I'm more likely to remember you in a stack of applications than somebody who said, I was a lawyer who worked in corporate law and I did legal drafting and legal research, because those are not going to stand out in a stack of applications where everyone is saying exactly the same thing. In terms of your cover letter, it's a one-page letter. It should look like a letter to a client. And in fact, that's how employers are looking at it. Employers are looking at your cover letter to see if I were to assign this person a one-page memo, could their writing be perfect enough and argumentative enough to go out to a client to convince them of what our position is. It should incorporate all of the connections and research and networking that you've done and link it to why you're excited about this role, why you're excited about this employer. You want to make sure you try to create sort of a narrative about who you are, addressing the questions of why you're in Canada, what is your connection here, what is your connection to the firm, why you want to continue to be a lawyer, or why you wanted the student role despite having such an impressive work experience back home. And so you need to create sort of this story so that we as readers understand who you are and why you're applying for this role now. I would say my biggest tip for a cover letter is to treat it like a research paper. Have your thesis. Your thesis is hire me. And so make sure every paragraph is a proof about why you should be hired, and treat it like if you are just going to be talking to the recruiter, what are the top 2 or 3 reasons you deserve this job? Well, those top 2 or 3 reasons should then be the best 2 or 3 body paragraphs within this cover letter. And just like in the resume, avoid vague language, avoid things that we can't prove, unqualified statements like, I have excellent interpersonal skills. Well, maybe prove it by telling me about a project where you led a team of 30 people to its success, right? Give me proof about the skills that you're talking about. So the typical cover letter that I see is something like, there's an address, there's a subject line, there's a salutation. Hi, I'm an NCA candidate. I'm looking to learn and grow with your firm. I'm really excited. There's like a statement about the law firm, and then there's a paragraph about your education or the experiences that you've had, paragraph about your skills, and then I'm looking to hearing from you. And as a Canadian cover letter, that's not bad. But as a Canadian legal cover letter, it's not doing you any justice, because you're not making an argument. You're not proving why you deserve this job. You're just stating facts and skills that are already on your resume. And so you're writing this as a cover page to the application, whereas in a Canadian legal application, the cover letter really is a chance for you to make that argument explicit about why your skills matter to this job, why your experiences are useful in this job, and what is your connection to this employer, and why are you so excited about this opportunity. And so I would maybe ask you to rethink the structure of your paragraph. So one, it's not so typical and therefore not standing out, but maybe give it an opportunity to talk about who you are, your story, what you've always been passionate about. One of the things I like to say is, I could just tell you, I have a psychology degree, I have a law degree, and I have a master's in human rights. And a different way to tell it might be, I've always been passionate about helping people, and my psychology degree helped me understand people's problems. My law degree helped me solve problems in a better way, and my human rights degree helped me understand how to advocate for people in an even better way. And all of those link towards me becoming a better legal professional. Right, so find new ways to sort of link the things you want to say together to tell me a more interesting story about who you are. The experiences, don't just list experiences, because the list of experiences should already be on your resume, but find a way to create and curate the experiences in a way that showcases you know exactly the skills I'm looking for you to have as an articling student, or you have all of the experiences I need for somebody who's going to be working in this area of law, or you have all the experiences relevant because you have worked with similar files or similar clients to what this firm has done. And in terms of the skills, you need proof. You need to prove how you know you need to have this skill, that you've talked to the articling students and these are the skills they use every day and you've honed them through years of practice in your home country. And just like a thesis, a research paper, make sure every paragraph refers back to your argument of why you should be hired, why this firm, why this job, why this position, and why you're the right fit for me. The interviews themselves, hopefully you get past the application stage and get selected and are memorable for interviews. For the job interviews in Canada, for legal job interviews, make sure you have something to say about every bullet point and sentence on your application. The amount of times I've seen in interviews, somebody just says, "Oh, tell me about that." You make sure you have a minute or two to say about everything. And so your answer can't be, "Oh, that was 10 years ago, I don't really remember it," because the response to that will be, "Then why did you put that on your application to begin with?" So make sure you have something to say about everything on your application. Behavioral-based interview questions are very common in Canada, and behavioral-based interview questions are asking you how you problem solve a situation. And so they can be asked one of two ways. The first is, "Can you tell me a time when?" And you're asked to give an example of a situation and how you've problem solved that. Or it can be asked as a hypothetical. "Pretend you are the articling student at my firm and this situation comes up, what would you do?" There's a way to answer those questions. It's called the STAR method. There's lots of different videos and resources out there about STAR approaches to answering behavioral-based interview questions. But the STAR acronym stands for setting out what the situation is, what your specific task is in that situation, and all of the actions that you would take to resolve that situation, and what the resolution would be. And so, for example, a behavioral-based question might be, you have a lot of conflicting timelines coming up, and you've just been assigned another project, and you are at capacity and cannot handle more work. What would you do? So the situation being, I have my capacity is full, but I'm asked to do this urgent task, and what are all the actions you would take? So maybe you would communicate with your team members to see if anything else can be reorganized, reprioritize some of the lower level things, and maybe that requires you talking to your principal or your supervisor to see what can be replaced, making sure you manage the expectations of the person who asked you about that urgent thing. You can't do it right now, but you'll get them a response in the next couple of days to see if you're able to handle it. Whether or not you can work with other team members on the file to make sure it gets done, even though you are fully at capacity. So finding all the actions you can take to address that, and then leading to the conclusion of, and then you would be able to satisfy all of the work requirements that you've been asked. There's a difference between private sector and public sector interviews as well. Private sector interviews tend to be more conversational, much more interpersonal, asking you about yourself, your skills, your interest in the job. Public sector interviews tend to be a lot more substantive. You're actually asked to know the law and legislation that the employer deals with, that they operate under, some of the significant case law. So you do have to study for those interviews, and you will actually be scored on those interviews and compared with everyone else who's interviewed with the public sector body. So you'll have to prepare for private sector and public sector interviews differently. My biggest biggest suggestion for everyone is to practice your answers out loud. As law students and lawyers, we're really good at thinking about what an answer might be or how we might construct an answer, but it's very different to actually relay that and communicate that verbally and expressively, especially if you're on camera, especially if it's over Zoom. And so practice your answers out loud, but even practice recording yourself. So you see, are you making a face? Do you think in a way that makes you look confused? Is your answer eloquent? Would you have a lot of filler words in your speech? So it's really important for you to practice those things out loud so it becomes more fluent, and it just helps you with your oral advocacy for yourself and will help you in all of your networking as well. So that's a little bit about launching your career here. I see that there's lots of questions that have come through. So I'm happy to take any questions that have.
I've been answering, I think, most of them as they've come in, Michael, and I don't know if Ramya has any that she particularly wants you to address, but a few people have sort of raised questions about the sort of legal assistant type roles. So I don't know if you want to give some general advice just about those kinds of administrative type roles for those who have legal training from overseas.
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my presentation, legal assistants are careers in themselves. And so, an employer is very hesitant to hire a legal assistant that they know is not going to stick around, is going to have to be replaced in a few months or in a year. And so if you do apply for those roles, recognize that you want to make sure you're making a commitment to serving that role and that you're going to give them a return on the investment of you getting that experience and training from them. You also want to make sure that you're highlighting the right skills. I see lots of internationally trained lawyers who are applying for legal assistant roles saying things like, I litigated in court, I did this multinational transaction, I worked on this multi-million-dollar file, when, like Megan said, legal assistant roles are a little bit more administrative, they're a little bit more procedural. And so focusing on the administrative skills you have, the process abilities that you have, and again, matching the skill to the job. So don't pitch yourself too high, don't pitch yourself too low. Make sure you're making the right pitch for that job. And then ultimately in the cover letter, making sure that, again, you're making an argument for why you want the legal assistant role, even though you are an internationally trained lawyer with years of experience and senior level experience. And realize that the story of, oh, I just want to learn and grow and get experience is not a unique story. Every applicant for every job wants to learn and grow and get experience. And so it doesn't help me understand who you are any better, but maybe it's how the firm operates, the files that they work on that really excite you. And this is a way to bridge some of the skills that you're missing from your home jurisdiction to Canada, but that you're committed to being a legal assistant because you want to make sure you're helping lawyers do what they do in the best way possible. So again, stop thinking of the legal assistant role as a stepping stone to being a lawyer and think of it as a full role in itself. And hopefully that gives you the confidence and abilities and experience you want when you are finally ready to become licensed. But don't apply for the legal assistant role saying, I want to be a legal assistant, but I really just want to be an articling student. So please consider me for that, because that's never actually going to be in your favor.
Good point. Tailor your application to every role you're applying for. And I love that you brought up the issue of confidence because that feeling of hesitation, not being confident enough shows whether it's in your cover letter or in person. And I think a lot of people from, our experience or have interviewing people is that they feel, oh, I'm an immigrant to this country and I'm so new. What do what do I have to offer? And that's sort of a hesitancy. But let me ask you, what percentage of Canada do you think is made up of immigrants?
That's really hard to say because, I mean,
No, I mean this is like a trick question.
yeah,
So yeah.
who knows? But even me, who presents very Canadian, lots of people don't assume I'm an immigrant when I completely am, and I'm very proud of it, right? So, I'm Chinese Canadian, and I'm very proud of that. So you just never know, but regardless of if you're Canadian or immigrant, confidence has to come across because
Yes.
as an employer, even if I get 5,000 applications, if nobody's impressive, I'm not going to hire anyone. Even if I need people desperately, if nobody impresses me enough, I'm not going to select anybody. Whereas if there's only 2 applicants and they're the perfect roles for me, or the perfect candidates for me, I'd rather choose both candidates than nobody, right? So that confidence has to come across not only in how you present, but in your application materials and in all of your interactions.
Okay, great. But let me tell you that um, 90% of Canada is made of immigrants. The
Exactly.
only people that this land belongs to are the people who are indigenous, who are
Exactly.
from here. So I think all of us should have a certain level of confidence because we've adopted this country as home. So, and you have to advocate for yourself, as Michael has said. And you also said, do your research, do your best, and that's all you can do, right? And you see what happens after that. I'm going to, we're going to wrap up. It's 12:30, but Megan, you've been answering all questions. You tag team really well, you and Michael. But
This
one
is our
thing
usual
is it,
sort of dog and pony show. One of us talks and the other one answers questions. So we got a good rhythm going.
okay. So one question is, I'm going to highlight this. Somebody said, are there any programs open for the fall? So I saw that you responded to it, Megan, and I'm just going to say that you can sign up for the Intensive Advanced Legal English for fall. So that course
That's
is still
correct.
available.
Yeah,
And is
that
that
one and
part-time or
that
full-time?
and that's pretty time sensitive because it's starting pretty soon. So that's a
Okay.
full-time offering for the fall, 4 months. And so for people who were looking to, have something available right away to boost their language proficiency, either because they're thinking about starting a degree program in the winter or doing their NCA challenge exams in 2025, it's a great program. We've been running it for a number of years. We took a little bit of a pause over the pandemic, but it's back. So that's a great option for fall. We do still have some single course enrollment applications open for fall. And right now we're taking applications for degree programs and graduate diploma for winter.
Winter.
So,
I saw that you answered the questions. You have answered
mhm.
a lot of questions. So thank you. I
Yeah.
think we'll wrap up. Unless there are any final words, we'll wrap up for today.
I mean, just, feel free to contact OSCPD for any of our, programming. Our recruitment coordinators are also really good at answering, some accreditation and career things. Feel free to also connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to sort of connect with people and help any ITLs in their way and their process. Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main message from us is that no matter what you want to do in Canada as a legal professional, an internationally trained lawyer or law graduate, there's a pathway that someone has already made for you. And we're kind of coming along the pathway with our lawnmowers, trying to make it easier to go down the path. So people I think should have confidence that there are opportunities for them, and coming to sessions like this is a really, really good first step in getting the information that you need to figure out which direction you want to go in. The path won't necessarily be straight, but there are
You'll get
interesting
there.
things waiting for you at the other end.
That's great. And Osgood actually works with us quite a bit. And when they offer scholarships, we usually publish it on our website and in our newsletter. So please sign up to our newsletter. You can subscribe on our homepage. So thank you, Megan. Thank you, Michael, for those excellent presentations. So we'll just wrap up and by saying thank you to our sponsors, ACCESS Employment and Osgood Professional Development. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Um, if you've missed anything, this is going to be posted on our website once again, and you'll be able to watch it and on our YouTube channel. So you have everything you need, the recording and contact information for Michael and Megan. So thank you so much and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.